So first of all, dear President Demetriou, dear Anita, dear speakers, dear deputy speakers, dear colleagues, this is one of those moments we are saying in this House when years from now people will look back and ask, when Europe was tested, did we rise to the occasion? Across our union, and I'm sure you feel this in your respective national chambers, people feel that something is shifting. They feel it when they sit at the kitchen table at the end of the month trying to make the numbers work. They feel it when energy bills rise again, when rents climb higher, when the weekly costs are more than they did just 1 year ago. They worry that their children may not have the same opportunity that they themselves once had. Small business owners feel it acutely. Costs are up, competition is tougher, and sometimes the rules feel heavier than they should. At the same time, war continues on our continent. Tomorrow marks 4 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. 4 years that have completely changed how we think about security, and how this has reminded us how fragile peace can be. In fact, tomorrow we will have a special extraordinary session of the plenary, and President Zelensky will address us. All of this is happening at the same time as the global economy shifts at extraordinary speed, with others investing heavily, moving very fast, and shaping the future of technology and industry in ways that will define the next decades. So I wanted to set the scene by starting to say all this because the challenges are many, but I would say also that our resolve to meet the moment is greater. Just a few days ago, at the informal leaders retreat and again at the Munich Security Conference, the message was crystal clear. Europe can no longer afford to drift. Small adjustments won't cut it anymore. The era of half measures is over, and that this is a time for decisions that match the scale of the challenges that we face together. And I believe Europe is capable of that. We proved it during the pandemic. We are proving it every day in our support for Ukraine, because when we act together, Europe can truly move mountains. Now, in each of these moments, it was our democracies all together that carried us through. It was national parliaments and this parliament taking responsibility, taking sometimes the most difficult, unprecedented decisions when it mattered most. And this week here in the European Parliament, together with you, we can all show once again that parliamentary democracy can deliver. So with that, let me warmly welcome you all to the European Parliament for this 15th European Parliamentary Week. Dear Anita, I thank you and your colleagues at the House of Representatives of the Republic of Cyprus for coordinating this week with us. Anita and I have been friends for years. We have worked together constantly, faced common challenges, have had similar debates, whether in this Parliament and yours, as I can say, for all of you. And when on 1st of January Cyprus took on the presidency of the Council, it could not have taken it at a more challenging time. And under President Christodoulidis and with your Parliament fully engaged, you have provided steady leadership, and I want you to know that we truly appreciate the cooperation we have. Now, this week we are joined by well over 200 participants, including over 120 members from 27 national chambers across the European Union, as well as from 4 candidate countries, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia and Serbia, and also from Norway. Each one of you brings with you the experience of shaping national budgets, of scrutinizing reforms, of explaining European decisions to people who expect answers. You know and you feel every day how policy translates into daily reality, how choices made here in Brussels and Strasbourg and in your own capitals affect people in towns and cities across Europe. You know what works on the ground and what needs to change. And that connection is so important, and that's why we invest so heavily in it. Because what we are discussing is essentially whether Europe can make life more affordable, whether we can bring greater stability to energy prices, whether we can create conditions for businesses to grow here in Europe rather than elsewhere, whether we can invest in skills so that workers are prepared for change and that nobody is left behind. In this Parliament, what we are doing right now is we are pushing to complete the single market. We are pushing to remove the barriers, so many of them, that still stand in our way. We are working to strengthen our energy union so supply is secure and prices are more predictable. We are cutting unnecessary red tape that holds back entrepreneurs and innovators. And we are shaping a long-term budget that supports our regions, that backs our farmers and equips the next generation with real opportunities. But none of this will work in isolation. And for this we need you completely. European decisions only work if they reflect national realities. Each election after election, we learn this more and more. And if such decisions are explained clearly at home, and you are that bridge, so over the next 2 days, your discussions will help shape how we move forward. So this is no ordinary week, for more reasons than one. I mentioned a special sitting tomorrow of the European Parliament. This will be a moment to reaffirm our commitment and support to Ukraine, and to show that when Europe is challenged, it stands together and it acts together. So all of you are invited to follow that sitting from the tribunes, and I truly hope that many of you will join us as we mark that moment of unity and of resolve. So colleagues, this is truly Europe's moment. The people who placed their trust in us when they went to the ballot box, they are watching what we do. They expect us to act, and we cannot afford to hesitate. So over the next 2 days, let us match words with action and show that when Europe is tested, it rises to the occasion. So now, it is my true honor to give the floor to my dear friend, to the President of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Cyprus. Dear Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, my dear Roberta, and allow me to extend my warmest greetings to each and every one of you. And you allow me, of course, to speak in my mother language, in Greek. Εξοχότατη κυρία Πρόεδρε του Ευρωπαϊκού Κοινοβουλίου.
Distinguished President of the European Parliament, good friend to Cyprus and my personal friend, dear Roberta, colleagues, members of the European Parliament, guests, representatives from the different parliaments throughout Europe and the European institutions that represent our values and our principles of identity and a European perspective. It's an immense honor and pleasure to open our session for the European Parliamentary Week, organized by the European Parliament and the representatives of Cyprus within the context of the parliamentary context for Cyprus's presidency. Allow me to thank the European Parliament and the President, my friend, for the close collaboration and hospitality shown to us here in Brussels. We've come together not just as representatives of institutions and countries, but as stewards of a common goal, one that was born from conflict and which matured through crises and is now a guiding star for the entire continent. What we do in this continent is based on dialogue. We discuss our differences with a view to uniting and integrating. This is not the result of pure similarities. This is a chance to really build something. And the resilience of our democracy is based on that. We are living in a time of uncertainty and change. The war in Ukraine has reminded us that peace and security in our continent cannot be taken for granted. What happened in Ukraine 4 years ago happened in my country 50 years ago. My country knows all too well what violations of international law look like, what occupation looks like, what invasions look like. So we will continue to support Ukraine, and simultaneously, we will follow what goes on the international stage. This is in all our interest. It's not just our resilience that's at stake, it's the unity that we have in what we believe and what we say. The time we're living in is characterized by a flood of information, but not necessarily knowledge. Media, which could support democracy, often acts as a source of false information. Lies spread faster than the truth. Artificial intelligence is about a balance between manipulation and the truth. Currently, fanaticism is spreading. Societies are polarizing. There are multiple parallel realities. The Eurobarometer has shown this is true. Citizens call for security and perspective, greater unity, and greater, more effective political action. And so, the European Parliament and national parliaments' roles must be more decisive in this context. We are the guardians of democratic legitimization. We must ensure that there is accountability and democratic participation beyond fanaticism and polarization. We must build bridges between European decision-making and the daily lives of our citizens. Often the gap seems huge, but in practice it's not. Quite the contrary, I would say. Strengthening parliamentary debate is a democratic necessity, not just an obligation. It is only through closer cooperation that we'll be able to mold European policy that will allow us to face strategic dependence on strategic raw materials, our need to increase defense spending and military spending, multiple transitions, demographic challenges, and a scarcity of skills, as well as migratory pressures and their weaponization. President, representatives, at this moment, a small country on the southeastern borders of Europe, partially occupied, has taken on a great responsibility. Cyprus, my homeland, has the honor of taking on the presidency for the European Council. The size of a country is not what we can use to measure the footprint it leaves on the European Union. All countries are the same in that sense. And Cyprus, which has been a member state of the EU for over 20 years, continues to suffer the consequences of occupation in part of its territory by Turkey, and takes on this presidency well aware of its responsibilities. We hope to act as an honest mediator in developing and building synergies, work towards common interests to bolster resilience in Europe. That is our duty. Our geographic position in the East Mediterranean is strategic and allows us to contribute concretely to building bridges between countries and promoting a foreign policy that is not just based on our economic interests. It will also take into consideration the UN Charter and the principles of the European Union, as well as international law. As a small island state, we believe that our greatest diplomatic success has been our full participation in building the European project. And we also believe that we've been given a tremendous opportunity with this presidency. We are more aware than ever that we cannot use or support international law only when it benefits us. We must be consistent both within and outside of the European Union. Madam President, representatives, Europe is at a crossroads. This is a crucial moment. The challenges that we face call on us to take larger steps. We must take giant steps forward in order to solve the problems that our citizens face. We must take advantage of every possibility when it comes to competitivity, productivity, technology, so that the EU is not left behind. The green transition must be fair, and the next MFF must better represent our aspirations. Our continent must lead in protecting democracy in a time of fanaticism. We must promote the truth in a time of false information. We must be just. We must be just in a divided world. At a time of great polarization, we must lead by example. Through agreement, we must provide security. The union, having a union doesn't mean that there aren't diverging opinions. We have to find a way to unite those diverging opinions. The generation that established the EU took a large step forward, and it is now incumbent upon us to keep that momentum. A small country like Cyprus can, through the European institutions, contribute to building our shared future. Representatives, we must bet on our union and ensure that our diversity of voices act as our strongest tool. It is our responsibility. We must stand up to the challenges that we face. We cannot remain still. We cannot allow polarization and fragmentation to take hold. We must hold space. We have to decide what we will strengthen and what we will leave behind. We must believe in our common future. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, dear Anita. Thank you to you all. Before we conclude the formal opening of this European Parliamentary Week 2026, I'd like to thank all of you members of national parliaments. You will have a lot of discussions also with members of the European Parliament over the next couple of days. We hope to see you, as I said, tomorrow during the solemn session. In a few moments you will move to the 3 parallel inter-parliamentary committee meetings. These will start at 3:30. These exchanges give us the chance to bring together national and European perspectives on our union's economic and policy challenges within the framework of the European semester and beyond. So I wish you all a very productive session, a very inspiring one. Try to meet as many members as possible, and if you need anything, please, we are here to help. Thanks a lot. Have a good afternoon. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can I ask you to take your seats, dear colleagues? Nice to see you here to open the European Parliamentary Week of 2026. So first of all, dear President Demetriou, dear Anita, dear speakers, dear deputy speakers, dear colleagues, this is one of those moments we are saying in this House, when years from now people will look back and ask, when Europe was tested. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can I ask you to take your seats, dear colleagues? Nice to see you here to open the European Parliamentary Week of 2026. So first of all, dear President Demetriou, dear Anita, dear speakers, dear deputy speakers, dear colleagues, this is one of those moments we are saying in this House, when years from now people will look back and ask, when Europe was tested, did we rise to the occasion? Across our union, and I'm sure you feel this in your respective national chambers, people feel that something is shifting. They feel it when they sit at the kitchen table at the end of the month trying to make the numbers work. They feel it when energy bills rise again, when rents climb higher, when the weekly costs are more than they did just 1 year ago. They worry that their children may not have the same opportunity that they themselves once had. Small business owners feel it acutely. Costs are up, competition is tougher, and sometimes the rules feel heavier than they should. At the same time, war continues on our continent. Tomorrow marks 4 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. 4 years that have completely changed how we think about security, and how this has reminded us how fragile peace can be. In fact, tomorrow we will have a special extraordinary session of the plenary, and President Zelensky will address us. All of this
in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Somalia, the Syrian Arab Republic, and Myanmar. And these figures represent only a fraction of the true scale of the problem, as access challenges, insecurity, and underfunding of child protection capacities frequently hamper the monitoring and reporting on grave violations. While some children are used in combat roles, others are used in supporting functions such as cooks, messengers, porters, or spies. Boys continue to be disproportionately targeted for recruitment and use in combat, but girls were also impacted, and often for different purposes, including as cooks, maids, fetish keepers, or for sexual violence, including forced marriage and sexual slavery. Child recruitment and use is not limited to armed groups. It is also perpetrated by government forces, some of which are listed in the annexes of the Secretary General's report, including the armed forces in Myanmar, South Sudan, and Syria. In 2025, based on our preliminary findings, the number of children recruited remained above 6,500 verified cases, even though the mandate covered fewer situations. Sex, age, ethnicity, disability, religion, economic means, and displacement status are key determinants of children's risk for recruitment. The roles they are forced into and the other violations they are subjected to, protection, basic livelihood support, or under peer or community pressure, or because of acute financial hardship. Dear Members of Parliament, regardless of how children are recruited or what roles they are used for, their association with armed forces or armed groups has devastating physical, psychological, and emotional consequences. Children who are released or separated must be handed over to civilian child protection partners who can ensure their safety and provide reintegration services, including family tracing and reunification. In 2024 alone, the United Nations provided protection or reintegration support to over 16,400 children formerly associated with armed forces or armed groups in situations on the Children and Armed Conflict agenda. Sustainable reintegration is essential, not only for the child's recovery and future, but also for the long-term peace and security prospects of any society. As states begin negotiations on a future treaty on the prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity, I urge states to consider the inclusion of recruitment and use of persons under the age of 18 as a standalone crime. This would extend protection to children aged 15 to 18 and close the gaps left by the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocol. It also ensures protection for children recruited and used in contexts that do not formally qualify as armed conflict. Dear Members of Parliament, the presence and engagement of the European Union in many countries on the Children and Armed Conflict agenda and its commendable work on peace, security and human rights are important contributions to the cause of ending and preventing grave violations against children. The updated EU guidelines on children and armed conflict the checklist for integrating child protection into civilian and military missions and operations, and the EU human rights and international humanitarian law due diligence policy on security sector support to third parties are essential tools guiding the EU's external action to protect conflict-affected children. I encourage the Commission to ensure their full implementation, including by mainstreaming child protection across peace and security policy, development programming, and humanitarian action, particularly in the context of the forthcoming communication on humanitarian aid. The European Parliament plays a crucial oversight and budgetary role within the EU's institutional framework. It can help sustain attention to children and armed conflict through regular scrutiny of implementation, strong language in its annual resolution on human rights and democracy, and the adoption of a dedicated resolution on children and armed conflict. I also welcome the work of the Intergroup on Children's Rights as an important platform for advancing the protection of conflict-affected children. Over the past year, my European Liaison Office in Brussels has provided numerous briefings and training to European stakeholders, and we stand ready to deepen this collaboration. As part of my efforts to prioritize regional partnerships, I also work closely with the African Union Commission and hope that we can likewise strengthen the trilateral partnership between the African Union, European Union, and United Nations on children and armed conflict. In this regard, I was delighted to issue a joint AU-EU-UN statement advocating against the recruitment and use of children on Red Hand Day, and I hope that this will be just the first of several joint initiatives we undertake together to further the protection of children. Lastly, I invite you to join our Prove It Matters campaign, which aims to rally the international community behind the Convention on the Rights of the Child, with children's voices at its centre. I would like to close my intervention with words of children I met during my mission to Syria just a few days ago. What moved me most was not what I saw, but what I heard. The children did not speak of politics or war or power. They spoke of simple universal dreams, a good education, a chance to be happy, a hope for a better future, and above all, safe places where they can learn, grow, and play. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Frazier. La parole est...
Thank you, Madam. The next speaker is Mr. Matthews for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and thank you for inviting us today. So just let me say first that we thank the European Parliament for its steadfast commitment to this issue through your resolutions and the budgetary oversight that you exercise, your debates and your engagement worldwide. You've consistently helped to keep the issue of children affected by armed conflict high on the EU's political agenda, and that helps to strengthen our credibility, whether it's in New York, in Geneva, at the UN, or indeed in the field. And continued close cooperation between the UN, civil society, Parliament and the EU institutions will be vital. Children in armed conflict remains a high priority of the EU's external action, and indeed, as was previously mentioned, we revised the EU guidelines on children in armed conflict in June 2024, and the policy framework therefore is in place, including with updated guidance instructions that we sent to EU delegations in March 2025, and the key issue now is to actually implement that policy framework. I think we heard very clearly from the Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General the degree to which the findings of the latest report are disturbing, the trend that they show in the increase in the six grave violations, which of course is linked to the proliferation of armed conflict around the world. And it's very troubling that something so fundamental, in other words, shielding children from violence, should seem to be so perpetually contravened. Conflicts are becoming more protracted, they're becoming more complex, they're increasingly urbanized, and this leads to children paying the highest price. Schools all too often become military targets. There's regular blocking of humanitarian convoys and the issue of recruitment or unspeakable abuse that were already mentioned, and these are actually violations of international law. And this deterioration comes in a challenging multilateral context, with the UN under severe budgetary pressure and with reform discussions going on. And in the midst of that, it's very important that we rally political support in terms of funding and action around this issue, including one of the key features of the SRSG's mandate, which is the ability to bring human rights issues directly to the table of the UN Security Council in this area. And in this environment, the EU has remained strongly engaged, so we were instrumental in ensuring the passage at the end of last year of the General Assembly resolution, which extends the mandate of the UN SRSG, and indeed in December last year we also co-sponsored the resolution at the General Assembly on the return of forcibly transferred and deported Ukrainian children. We're now in the midst of preparations for the 61st session of the Human Rights Council, which opened today, and indeed there is a resolution run by the EU together with the Latin American and Caribbean countries, which is on the rights of the child with a specific focus on children and armed conflict. And in preparing that resolution, we, through our delegation in Geneva, consulted 23 children affected by armed conflict, and their message was very, very clear. Stop killing children, safeguard access to education, ensure humanitarian access, and involve children meaningfully in policy making for their futures. As was mentioned, we're also using public diplomacy, so the joint EU-AU-UN statement, which was mentioned on Red Hand Day on the 12th of February, and looking ahead, at the end of this year, December, will come the 30th anniversary of the Children in Armed Conflict mandate of the UN, which will give us further opportunities. So just to say that the revised EU guidelines that I mentioned, they structure our action on the ground every year in consultation with the UN and civil society. The Council updates the EU's priority list of countries where the plight of children is most acute, and that's to ensure that our action and programming follows the places where the risks are the highest and where we can make the greatest tangible difference. So those guidelines give concrete tools for action, whether it's strengthening partnerships with regional and multilateral organisations or civil society on the ground, whether it's using our political dialogues to press for an end to grave violations, promoting the Safe Schools Declaration, or indeed ensuring child participation in decision-making processes. We will have further opportunities this year, including working with the Commission on the upcoming communication on humanitarian assistance, which will have a strong international humanitarian law dimension as well. So it's very clear to us that children must never be targets of war and that our work in this area must continue.
This is a message from the interpreters. Would somebody up?
Merci, Monsieur Matthews. Monsieur Shahzamani.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Mr. Shahzamani, you have 5 minutes.
Very much. War Child welcomes the important discussion on the recruitment and use of children in armed conflict. Sadly, as mentioned already, despite years of efforts by states and civil society and the UN to eliminate this practice, we are instead witnessing an increase in the number of children being recruited and used by armed forces and armed groups. War Child has supported conflict-affected children for nearly 3 decades. We have developed a specific care system that integrates responses to children's protection, education, and mental health and psychosocial needs. For many years, we have implemented programs to prevent recruitment and use, as well as supporting the reintegration and rehabilitation of children leaving armed forces and armed groups. As an example, in South Sudan, we trained military personnel on the prevention of children being used in armed groups, supported the development and implementation of national action plans, provided livelihood assistance to demobilized children and their caregivers, facilitated psychosocial support for demobilized children, and delivered protection and psychosocial support training to social workers from NGOs and government institutions. And we have done this in many other countries where we implement programs. Currently, our work on this is integrated into our broader child protection, prevention, response, and case management activities. If the case of a child leaving an armed group or force is referred to us by a community or other partners, we facilitate psychosocial support, cash assistance, and in-kind support, such as education, materials, and clothing. Our community-based work also includes training and awareness raising on the prevention of recruitment and use of children. And of course, in most cases, we also work very closely with the government on these issues. From our experience, we know that reintegrating children who have been recruited and used in a long-term process is a long-term process that requires engagement with both the affected child and the receiving community. Many children face stigmatization, which makes their reintegration particularly challenging. They also require psychosocial education and livelihood support. War Child has developed evidence-based programs to reduce stigmatization, address mental health issues. The EU has a strong track record of supporting reintegration programs and prevention programs and has a critical role to play. Firstly, the EU and its members must ensure sustained and long-term funding for reintegration projects. Such funding does not just enable the recovery of individual children, but in a critical investment in community stabilization and peace building. In this context, I urge that during the ongoing negotiations of the next EU multinational financial framework, children's rights are prioritized through the inclusion of a special child's marker and by ensuring that sufficient funding is allocated to humanitarian, peace building, and development programs, especially in a time where these fundings are under extreme pressure outside the EU specifically. Second, we are alarmed with the erosion of international human rights and international humanitarian law. We call EU to firmly stand up in defense of international law and take concrete measures against those who violate laws and commit grave violations against children. Real accountability incentivizes behavioral change and encourages perpetrators to end grave violations. Furthermore, we congratulate EU for their recently updated CAC policy framework and we call for its full implementation. The Paris Principles also remain an important and useful tool in this regard. States must implement the Paris Principles and guidelines on children associated with armed forces or armed groups, which encourages states to prevent recruitment, facilitate the immediate release of children, and support their reintegration. Finally, we are concerned that the context of counterterrorism laws and operations, children who have been recruited and used are sometimes treated as perpetrators rather than as victims. We urge all states to recognize such children primarily as victims and to refer them to child protection actors or, where necessary, handle their cases through an appropriate juvenile justice system. While the situation for children recruited and used in conflict is bleak, progress is possible. Since the establishment of Children and Armed Conflict Agenda in the mid-1990s, more than 200,000 children have been released from armed groups and armed forces through the work of the United Nations and civil society partners. And the EU has had an important role in that. With the right support, each child has an opportunity to rejoin society and recover their childhood. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Moving on now to questions from members. Ms. Timilo, first of all, from the Socialists.
Obrigada a todos os nossos convidados. Hoje assinalamos.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us today. Today we are marking an international day which shouldn't actually exist. There should be no such thing as child soldiers. Despite that, many international organisations have reported on the way in which children continue to be recruited to armies. Our chairman told us already that there are estimated to be 250,000 children acting as child soldiers. They are threatened, extorted, kidnapped, used not just as soldiers but as guards, messengers, cooks. They're often subject to sexual violence, deprived of both safety and their childhood, and of course of their future. The Convention on the Rights of the Child has been ratified by many countries, but is most certainly not universally applied. This is why it's so important that work on conventions over and beyond international humanitarian law must continue. And the European Union must exert pressure on third countries which haven't signed up to the convention. Recently, Cyprus entered into a commitment regarding this. But a lot more needs to be done. It's important to underline the fragile nature of institutions and extreme poverty. Factors such as this continue to feed in to the ongoing recruitment of child soldiers. So, I would like to move on to my questions now, referring specifically to that matter. The fact is, we do, of course, need practical, concrete penalties, measures to punish those involved. Those responsible for recruiting child soldiers must be held to account. We've also suggested efforts to tackle the question of funding. It's very important, of course, to ensure that child soldiers be reintegrated into society afterwards, and that requires UN support. I would like to refer to one specific matter. As Ms. Vanessa Fraser said in her intervention, clearly we do need regular scrutiny of which rules are being applied and which aren't. The United Nations has underlined that the European Union's focus must be on effective implementation, and the reports underline that a great deal remains to be done when it comes to financial instruments and continued support for reinsertion and reintegration. So what exactly has the European Union been doing? Do we have a list of priority countries? What are the main risks in terms of violations? What work has been done with embassies? What practical measures are being taken right now to ensure that this plague come to an end? The fact is, children are often very resilient, and this is one of the few sources of hope in our fight. But the ability of children to recover doesn't solve the problem. We have to act quickly. And the time has come for us to take practical action.
Madame Hassan.
Ms. Hassan for the left.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'd like to thank all the guests for their presentations today. The last annual report from the Secretary-General of the UN on the fate of children in armed conflict says that we have seen a 21% increase in violations against children in armed conflict. And we see that the highest figures are for different reasons in different contexts. For example, in Israel, the occupied Palestinian territories, but also in DRC. This has been raised by the different speakers, but many people haven't referred to Israel, and the figures are quite alarming. It's about 700 Palestinian children every year who are arrested and arbitrarily detained in Israeli prisons, according to Save the Children. And this is backed up by Amnesty International documents. From the age of 12 years, they can appear before a military court. They are detained for 121 days on average in Israeli prisons, and that comes from the United Nations. So I don't want to go through all of the different legal bases and conventions. All of us, including the NGOs in particular, have referred to those, and organisations that may be heard by the committee. But I'd like to ask a question to the EEAS about Israel's impunity. We have tried to sound the alarm several times. We have tried to raise the issue of Israel's impunity. It's an exception in the EU and no one understands it. There's no problem getting sanctions against other states. And I would remind you that it was about 20,000 children who were assassinated during the genocide by the Israeli state. So my question is very simple. What measures have been taken by your service to build a dialogue based on strict respect of human rights, particularly of children, a dialogue that is with Israel? Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Hassan. Mrs. Gomez-Lopez has the floor.
Spanish. Bueno, en primer lugar.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the three speakers for their magnificent presentations. And I'd like to start with a question. It seems a very simple one, but it's actually very complex. The High Representative has said how, over the last few years, there's been an increase in the number of cases, of direct and indirect victims. And I've read that there could be up to 25%, that's up to 41,000 children who have been recruited, 23,000 who may have been the victim of torture and physical abuse. The reality is that in this report there is a significant increase. And so that's why the question I'm going to ask is complex, not simple. What is happening here? Why is the situation so bad here? Bearing in mind that armed conflicts are increasing in number and in degree of violence. So why are we failing? What could be done better? Not only the international community, but specifically the European Union. And here I'd like to ask some more specific questions. The High Representative talked in the report about the fact that there had been cases of child soldiers in Colombia recently. And the Colombia has signed the convention. So what could be done about that? I'd also like to ask the representative of the Union about two things. First, you talked about specific tools. Could you say a bit more about the specific tools that are available to us? Or whether we could participate in a programme to support child soldiers when they're being reintegrated into society. This was referred to by other speakers. Reintegrated then into society after participating in armed conflict. And then we heard from the representative of War Child. We're talking about the multi-annual financial framework. I'm participating in the work on that. And so I'd like to understand more about what we could do to include measures in the multi-annual financial framework. Do you have any comments on that? I was interested to hear what you said about the fact that there are children who are victims of recruitment and are being treated as terrorists. And then the High Representative also referred to something which struck me. I wonder whether there are some legal arguments about that. You mentioned something very important about the revision of crimes against humanity and whether recruitment of child soldiers could be included as a specific crime. Could you say something about that, please? Thank you.
Merci, cher collègue.
Thank you. I've got two questions. This first is for Mr. Shazamani. You gave us a very positive description of the EU's role here, and that's a good thing. But which other organisations are working on this issue? And Mrs. Fraser, you talked about collaboration between the UN, the EU and the African Union. Are there African Union states that are working on this in particular? And if so, which states are working on these issues? I'd like to give the floor to our panellists to reply. So let me give the floor first to Mrs. Fraser. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. You have all raised very interesting things and issues I would really like to discuss with you. There is a really important role that the European Union can play in order to help us stem the violence against children, and especially these violations that we report on. First of all, there are countries where the European Union has, provides funding to structural funds. I think it would be very important that there is a human rights traffic light system, perhaps, that countries do collaborate in order to stem the violations against children, will have more incentives by the European Union. I'm not, development is very important, so I'm not saying that you should stop development funds, but I think that there should be a bit of a reward system and an acknowledgement of it. And in the discussions, even the European Parliament, in the various committees, whether it's economic or whether it's the Foreign Affairs Committee, but the Human Rights Committee, of course, but also the High Representative, when representing the European Union in some of the meetings with these countries, we should have key advocacy points. We have a specific number of countries which are on our list. We have 23 countries and one regional situation, which is the Lake Chad Basin region, which is on our report, where we give very important information about the trends that are ongoing there. And I think it is important that there's a common advocacy here, that there are common statements which are made in order to show these countries that it's not just the United Nations that is saying something about them, but the EU also takes note of what that country is doing on this particular issue, and that the EU supports child protection in that country and supports the country acting on child protection. There are different issues when it comes to the situations of countries. We really need to look at each situation on our report differently, because in some situations you have state actors, so the national forces. So if it is a national army, for example, that is recruiting children or abusing children, then clearly we need to work directly with the government to ensure that they are held accountable and to ensure that the government passes all the national legislation that is required to make sure that there is, accountability for whoever is violating this. But when there are non-state actors, we have to partner with the countries also in order to work with the armed groups to ensure that we can enter into action plans, for example, with armed groups for the handing over of children. We do this. One of the members mentioned Colombia. For example, Colombia has a mediation process for their peace which is being carried out in Qatar. We were given as an office access to the parties within that mediation process. We have started to discussions directly with one of the armed groups in order to enter into an action plan with them, which could lead to us and our partners separating a few hundred children from this armed group and reintegrating them into society. Colombia, it's true, is a member of the convention, but it is not Colombia that is violating the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is the armed groups. And so we have to partner to support Colombia in order to combat these armed groups for their violations. There are a number... I have, for example, to Syria, and this is the the type of discussions I have held over there. So I will give you an example with Syria. Syria now is looking at a new future, has turned the page and is looking towards the future. We did have the Syrian army under the Bashar regime, which was listed for recruitment and use. However, we had very important discussions with the new Syrian government and with the defense forces, where we ensured, and we have commitments from them, and they have implemented already laws and a code of ethics within the army that recruitment will only be above the age of 18. Now that the armed groups, as part of their transitional process now and transitional justice, the Syrian government is absorbing the armed groups into one new national force. They have undertaken that there will not be recruitment under the age of 18, and that any of the forces that are being amalgamated into the new Syrian force, there would be age vetting, and if there are already children within these armed groups, they will not be absorbed in this absorption process. This is really very important, because when we enter into this action plan and this prevention plan with the new Syrian army, in order to put into paper these commitments, which will be time-bound, and the UN in country will have the opportunity to verify that they have that the new Syrian government have kept their word and they have implemented their commitments with us, then it would mean that we have protected several hundred children in Syria. We have protected them from these old violations continuing. And this is the way we need to work with countries. So we need to get the data that we have on our report, and we need to analyze it situation by situation and find the solutions that we need, which are specific to that situation. And we can work together on this, because the EU also is a very important partner with us. The African Union is very active on this. I had important meetings with the African Union at the end, in December of last year, and they had committed to me, and they have fulfilled that commitment, that they will appoint my counterpart. So now they also have a special representative on children and armed conflict, and we will work together on joint initiatives, which I will also propose to the European Commission, where we could do joint advocacy, but also field trips together, solutions for specific countries. If my office enters into action plans with violators, how can the other two organizations also assist us in ensuring that we support that country for the implementation of the commitments of that action plan? Thank you.
Merci, Madame Frazier. Monsieur Mathieu.
Thank you, Mrs. Fraser. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions from the honourable members. So I should explain the mechanism by which we work on children and armed conflict. So what our guidelines conceive of and how it's implemented through the guidance note to our delegations is that delegations in the priority countries have a contact point, and that contact point is responsible for helping to integrate all the means that we have at our disposal. Those can be at the political level, so I could take the example of recent visits to Ethiopia by the EAS political director. They can be at the level of humanitarian assistance, because usually we're very active on that front in places where there is a conflict. They can also be at the higher diplomatic level, and I would refer there to meetings in the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference on Sudan that the High Representative held. So those priority countries are about 24 in number. They follow very closely the evidence that's given to the Security Council in the annual reporting by the SRSG, and they cover many of the countries that we've already referred to in this conversation, including Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Ukraine, and indeed Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. There's a very important role for the UN that we can't replace, as Mrs. Fraser said, because they have a neutrality that allows them to talk to and get action commitments not only from the armed forces of governments, but also from armed groups, so in other words, non-governmental parties to conflict. And we're also very involved in trying to build the framework and protect the framework for international accountability, first of all through support for the ICC that was already mentioned, but also in terms of calling out perpetrators of violations against children through the global human rights sanctions regime and the territorial sanctions regimes of the EU. So our aim is to combine all of those things together. If I take an example like Sudan, a significant share of the EU's funding, which is in the level of many hundreds of millions of euro, is going directly to protecting children, maintaining continuity of education, helping to safeguard children from violence, exploitation and recruitment, and to support family tracing and reunification for unaccompanied minors. Just to say at the end, one of the honourable members raised an extremely big question, which is related to accountability in the case of Israel and Gaza, and there I think I would simply refer to you to what the High Representative has said in public on seeking accountability for violations of the laws of war, the Geneva Conventions, and on the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity, which is upcoming in the UN through a long intergovernmental process in New York. The EU is in fact one of the main proponents of a convention in that area. Thank you very much.
Merci, Ms. Matthews. Monsieur Shah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthews. Mr. Shazamani, you have the floor.
You asked which other countries are also supporting this work. The list, unfortunately, is not that big. I mean, Canada, Japan, some countries in MENA have said that they are interested. And, of course, the European Union at this point is the biggest actor. And we cannot hide away from the elephant in the room, which is with the United States approach to ending aid. This actually puts the emphasis and the importance of the work of the European Union and the Parliament, and the emphasis on rights-based approaches. You asked, I think the representative asked about what is the European Union or the Parliament doing wrong because numbers are getting worse. I think the situation where we cannot actually put pressure on governments because they turn around, and we've even have this tell us, well, who are you to tell us what is right anymore and wrong? Because look at what is happening and what are the crimes that you are supporting yourselves. And the anti-rights movements that are taking place also in many of our countries. Then it becomes a much more challenging approach to have really conversations which puts rights-based at the center, and you keep pushing for this. And you asked which other countries are supporting. I have to also give credit to the countries. For example, I know the situation in Colombia is getting worse, but the Colombian government has also done a lot. So some of the countries where the use of ex or child soldiers are in place are still trying to combat this as well. So they need to also be given certain credit for that. You asked some specific questions on what can you do more in the upcoming annual planning. I don't think there's time here, but I'm happy to take your contact information and come back with very clear recommendations on that, and also the situation of children that are being treated as terrorists rather than as victims. Espero que esté bien porque podemos cambiar esta información después. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Shazawami. Thank you for your reply, although you expressed some concerns as well. And that brings us to the conclusion of our debate. But to do that, I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Annick Villarosa, who's the unit head at DG ECHO for humanitarian aid policies and international humanitarian law. Over to you.
Well noted. Yes, indeed, as we're all very much aware, the global humanitarian system is under unprecedented strain. The current funding crisis threatens to dismantle core components of child protection systems, including data and evidence gathering, frontline services, skilled personnel, preventive programming, and coordination structure. And this is unfolding at a time when the number and severity of humanitarian crisis, and particularly armed conflict, as mentioned by previous speakers, are escalating. Children face heightened risk of 6 grave violations, abuse, exploitation, and neglect. And in this challenging context, the Commission reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the agenda of children. Commissioner Labib continues investing politically and financially in ensuring the compliance with the international humanitarian law and prioritization of children's protection, well-being and empowerment, and she is also a strong advocate of children's right to safe and quality learning in conflict settings. The Commission's key focus on child protection and the firm budgetary commitment of the 10% of its yearly funding to education in emergencies makes it a reference donor with continuously strong child programming. Last year, we dedicated nearly 180 million euros for education in emergencies and child protection activities. This support included interventions such as case management services for children associated with armed groups and armed forces and survivors of grave violations, for instance, in Sudan. I believe that Alice mentioned it. Referral pathways and restoring family links in Ukraine, integrated education, child protection and psychosocial programs for conflict-affected children. I would mention, for instance, Northwest Syria, including with War Child Netherlands, actually, I believe. Community-based protecting measures, that was in Myanmar. Relocation of children at risk of recruitment into armed groups to safer areas. We mentioned Colombia. This is one of the cases where we do support these kind of actions. And then, of course, advocacy everywhere to address grave children's rights violations. The Commission also offers direct funding support to the children and armed conflict monitoring and reporting mechanism in Yemen, Lebanon, Myanmar and Bangladesh. And via what we call our Enhanced Response Capacity Program, we support Save the Children Netherlands with a project to strengthen humanitarian access for children. And the work explores access challenges and solutions for these children in Palestine, Myanmar, Yemen and Mali. So the evidence gathered so far show that a dedicated focus on children's interests, including their access to humanitarian services and protection, can actually offer powerful entry points for de-escalation and stabilization, because parties to conflict, even when deeply polarized, can show a degree of alignment around children's access to healthcare, nutrition, education and safety. And that is why children will remain an explicit focus of our work and will be a priority under the upcoming communication on humanitarian aid. I believe also Alice mentioned that one that will be adopted in May this year, and this is being co-drafted with the EAS. That this will also contain two main elements, this communication, one on a new strategic approach to humanitarian diplomacy and another one on fragile context and an integrated approach to fragile context. I thank you for your attention.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Ms. Villarosa. Protecting children from the scourge of war isn't just a legal obligation, it's a moral imperative, and it's the cornerstone of a world which respects fundamental human rights. We'll continue, for our part, to work with our partners in the other European institutions, with the United Nations, international organisations and civil society to prevent and eliminate this phenomenon and work to ensure that children the world over grow up in a world of peace. Thank you to our speakers. We're going to take a short break now, after which we'll resume with the next item on the agenda. 2 minutes break. Thank you.
it's okay for us. I wish you a nice meeting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I wish you a nice meeting.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to this meeting. Let me inform you that this meeting. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for joining us here and online. Please be informed that this meeting is web streamed. We have an invitation in English, French, and German. The draft agenda has been sent to you. I don't see any remarks. The agenda is adopted. I also want to go over to point 2. The draft minutes for a meeting of 14th of January was sent to you beforehand. I don't see any comments. You can still send in comments till tomorrow morning, and then the draft minutes will be approved. Dear colleagues, I just finished the meeting of the Joint Bureau of the Africa-European Parliamentary Assembly, and I'm happy to inform you that we will have begun preparations for the inaugural assembly, which will be held from 12 to 14 May in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. We will discuss this in more detail at our next meeting in Strasbourg in March. And then we now come to the political point of our agenda today, the exchange of view on the political situation in Uganda, specifically on the context of the 2026 elections and the post-electoral situation, in the presence of Mr. Robert Kyagulanyi, Bobi Wine, the leader of the National Unity Platform, main opposition party in Uganda. He is in remote connection. Then we have Dr. Sarah Birete, chairperson of the Global Network of Domestic Election Monitors and executive director of the Uganda Civic Organization Center for Constitutional Governance. She's also remotely connected. And then we have here with us Mr. Jonas Johnson, head of division EAS, Africa 5, Horn of Africa, East Africa. Dear colleague, distinguished guests, good afternoon. I'm pleased to welcome you again. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Today's session will be held on the political situation in Uganda. Like I said, I welcomed already our two guests. The exchange follows on the adoption of the European Parliament's resolution on 12 February on the post-electoral situation in Uganda and threats against opposition leader Bobi Wine. Let me first underline that Uganda is a very important partner for Europe in terms of regional peace and security. Uganda is a primary troop contributor to regional peacekeeping, particularly in Somalia, and it plays a key role in mediating conflicts in South Sudan and the DRC. Uganda is also a major refugee hosting nation, influencing regional stability by providing refuge and security to a large number of displaced persons. As partners, we want to work together to improve the situation of the Ugandan population. At the same time, we must be clear that our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms in the European Parliament is non-negotiable. We will not shy away from difficult conversation and will not contribute to the silencing of opposition. In the spirit of partnership, as illustrated by the Samoa Agreement, we wanted to have an opportunity to discuss these issues of concern with the government of Uganda. Unfortunately, the ambassador couldn't be here today with us, but we will sure make a new appointment so that we can also have an exchange of view with the ambassador. It is important to note that accountability is one of the central principles of democracy as it applies to the EU treaties. As part of its oversight role within the EU institutions and parliamentary diplomacy, the European Parliament regularly adopts resolutions on electoral processes worldwide, particularly when credible reports raise strong concerns. Resolutions are an essential means by which the European Parliament expresses its view on political processes, EU politics and global developments. The Parliament also uses resolutions to scrutinize other EU institutions, including the European Council, as part of its democratic oversight role within the European Union. In the resolution on Uganda, which is adopted on the 12th February, which was supported by an overwhelming majority of members, 514 votes in favor, 3 against, and 56 abstentions, We note serious concerns regarding the conduct and aftermath of the Ugandan general elections held on the 15th of January 2026, which has unfortunately failed to meet fundamental democratic standards. That opposition leaders and members such as Robert Kyagulanyi, it's easier to pronounce Bobi Wine, and human rights defenders such as Sarah Birete were particularly targeted in a very alarming manner, with arbitrary arrests, prolonged detention, and even disappearances. This is why we called in our resolution for the end of all violence, threats, harassment, arbitrary detention of opposition figures, activists, and critics, the dropping of all politically motivated charges, the lifting of arbitrary suspension of civil society groups, and the organization of comprehensive electoral and institutional reforms to ensure the independence of the Electoral Commission and judiciary. We also called for independent and impartial investigations into crimes against humanity committed by Ugandan political and military leaders, and into similar crimes committed by politicians and military in other African countries. We have here with us today NUP leader Mr. Bobi Wine, who himself has been a subject of institutional harassment and who said that his wife and children fled Uganda for fear of their lives following the January 15 presidential election. The European Parliament resolution also mentioned very serious concerns about how the opposition has been treated in the run-up, during and after the elections. We are eager to hear an update from your side. We would also welcome some concrete ideas on the way forward for Uganda. Dear sir, you have the floor. Good afternoon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, friends. Greetings. I appreciate so much the opportunity. I want to appreciate the European Union Parliament for the resolution on Uganda and for keeping an eye on Uganda. We don't take it for granted. Every time we see development partners keeping an eye on what is happening here in Uganda. We also recognize that the EU is an important partner to Uganda, and we intend to maintain and also improve this partnership and this cooperation. We would also love to see this relationship happening between the people of Uganda and the European Union, not just General Museveni's illegitimate military regime. I'm still on the run. I'm still in hiding because of the continuing threats on my life since what happened on the 16th of January when my house was, my compound was raided and I fled my house. And also the following raid that happened on the 23rd of January where my wife was assaulted and my family members were assaulted, and the military took over my home, which the military still occupies to the present day. My home is surrounded and the military is in charge of it now. What happened on the 15th of January and the preceding days was not an election. It was a military operation, and I'm very glad that it was clearly stated during the debate in the European Union Parliament. This violence started much earlier. It started on nomination day, and it went through the campaign trail. And I'm glad that the resolution mentions in specifics victims like Mesa Chokero, who was shot and killed, and also General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who is the military chief and the son of General Museveni, came out on Twitter and, mentioned how he killed 22 of our people, and hoping that I would be the 23rd. I must mention, though, that the numbers that he put are much less. Maybe he mentioned or he meant those that he killed personally. Otherwise, the numbers that we have of the victims, of the people that have been killed, are much more than 22. Many civil society organizations were closed down, especially those that are in the area of governance. It was mentioned, and I want to reiterate it again, that the internet was shut down 3 days before the election. Media houses were ordered not to relay the results that were happening and all that was going on ground on the polling stations, to ensure that there's a clear disconnect between what was happening in the polling stations and what was being relayed by the Electoral Commission. I'm very glad that Dr. Sarah Birete is with us today. In this meeting, she was arrested, detained, because she was taking an effort to speak out and educate people, the citizens of Uganda, about their rights and on democracy. You know, I mentioned it that 2 of my deputy presidents were abducted on the eve of the election, and they remained missing for 3 weeks. We later learned that they were being detained in a military barracks, in a special forces military barracks, which is run by General Museveni's son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba. Most of our coordinators were arrested, were picked and detained. Some are still in detention, while some were dropped off. These also included officials from our election management committee. So what Mr. Byabakama, the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, relayed was actually completely different from what happened on the grounds. The law requires that there must be, coordination in the tallying of the results. That did not happen. The candidates were not given copies of declaration of result forms, and the Electoral Commission simply declared numbers that it did not justify where they were coming from. As we speak, we are still demanding that the Electoral Commission uploads the declaration forms so that the nation can be able to follow in transparency, so we can be able to compare the evidence that we have, the declaration of result forms that we have, to what was paraded by the Electoral Commission. But up to now, they have not uploaded the results on the internet like it's supposed to be. Somebody may ask, why then didn't we go to court? But we've mentioned it again, that institutions in Uganda have all been destroyed, and including the judiciary. The manner of appointment of the Chief Justice recently is evidence to that. The Chief Justice was sworn in General Museveni's farm. So that and many other reasons cause us not to have trust in the judiciary in Uganda. And many times the regime, General Museveni or his son, have actually been guiding publicly and sometimes privately, determining how the judiciary does its work. So we found no redress whatsoever in the Ugandan judiciary, and that's why we did not go to court. We have presented some asks, which I want to reiterate here. We've asked for targeted sanctions that target particular individuals and regime officials that have, excelled in gross human rights violations. We believe that will curb their appetite in abusing, human rights, in undermining democracy, and to ensure that there's accountability for their crimes against humanity. Because I know we have other speakers on the platform, I want to appreciate you for the opportunity and to further call for more interest and for more attention to the people of Uganda. We really appreciate the attention, but we still request the international community to keep an eye on Uganda, to keep an eye on what is going on here in our country. I thank you for God and my country.
Thank you very much. I can promise we will do that. We will. I make sure, as the chair of the delegation EU Africa that we will keep an eye on Uganda and we will follow up the situation very closely. We have also here with us today prominent human rights lawyer and expert on constitutional governments, Dr. Sarah Birete, who was arrested a few days before the vote to give us her own account on the situation from the civil society perspective. You have the floor, Dr. Birete. Welcome in this meeting. We don't hear you. Maybe put the mic on the technical level. Try again.
Hello.
Yes, now we hear you.
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you so much, and I wish to add my voice to that of Honorable Robert Chagrani to thank you for the interest you're showing in the plight of Ugandans under a context of declining democracy. I want to start by re-echoing the values of the EU as enshrined under Article 2 of the European Union Treaty. And these are the values that we look up to: the values of human dignity, the values of freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, and respect for human rights. The same values are enshrined in our constitution in Uganda, and they guide our work as a constitutional watchdog, the Center for Constitutional Governance, and the Human Rights Defender, and the work that I do as a chairperson of the Global Network for Domestic Election Observers. On 30th December, I was not feeling well. I was in bed sleeping. I was awakened by the children that police had sieged our home. About 30 police and military officers had surrounded our home. 15 of these officers entered into the compound and were captured by the CCTV camera at my home. 5 of these officers entered up to my bedroom where I was sleeping under medication with two guns. As I woke up to take a shower in my bathroom, 2 armed officers kept guard on my open bathroom, violating my right to privacy, violating my dignity. I was incarcerated for 3 days at Natete police station under difficult conditions of restricted access to family and lawyers. My child, I was allowed my son and my niece to bring me meals, but they would be held for more than 3 hours before serving me a simple meal, yet I was undergoing heavy medication in incarceration. I was denied legal representation. My lawyers only met me a few hours on 1st of January, a few hours to interrogation. During interrogation, I had 4 lawyers present at the police station. I was denied legal representation. I was alone. And 1 lawyer was told to sit outside and he will be invited by the police if needed. Yet Article 23 of the Constitution provides that any person suspected of having committed a crime is entitled to legal representation, access to family, lawyers, and doctors. I was denied. All my visitors were chased away. I was held 2 days without knowing the offense I had committed. And when it clocked 44 hours in detention, that's when an officer came to interrogate me. And I was asked questions regarding the president and his son and the media interviews I do as part of my work in advocacy. During arrest, all the phones that were in my home, including those of my children, were wrongly confiscated by the police in a scuffle that led to assault of my children, and the phones of my children were held for more than 1 month, and they were left at home with no means of communication. My phone is still in police custody, and I have started experiencing digital impersonation. My handle on TikTok, my personal handle, has been brought down by hackers, yet it's registered in the phone that is with the police. 3 different accounts have been opened in my names using my biodata and my place of work, and they post offensive communication using deep fakes. The communication is related to what I was interrogated about. 2 of these accounts were opened when I was in detention in prison. And with my phone in the hands of police and with the digital impersonation, I don't know what else they are doing regarding my personal data and communication. Towards elections, I was profiled as a highly dangerous person because of the work that I do as a chairperson of the GENDEM, chairperson of the East and Horn of Africa Election Observers Network, vice chairperson of the Africa Elections Observer Network, and president of the East Africa Civil Society Forum. The security thinks that this work that I do in the region, on the continent, and at the global level is dangerous, and it warrants me being treated as a terrorist because of promoting democracy and human rights. This profiling is what led to my detention and the charges that are related to a voter register, which I have never seen, that are related to sharing of data on a voter register, which is a public document, and these are the charges that I am battling in court. When you look at the work, the characterization of my work during travels at the airport, some random security officers would ask me what I do and why I travel so much. And the work was characterized as recruiting for opposition, as fundraising for opposition in security files. This is how I became a target of regime harassment. The unwritten offenses by the military and the security agencies in Uganda is that if you are a promoter of democracy and human rights, then you are a dangerous person to the government of Uganda. Our constitutional watchdog, the organization that I head locally, capitalizes on demanding for accountable leadership in line with the Constitution of Uganda. But calling out to the regime to account on human rights violations on several media platforms is what rendered me to be branded as a criminal in Uganda. The siege under my home, which lasted for more than 2 hours, surrounding the whole neighborhood, violated our privacy, led to assault of my children, led to the detention of their phones, and depriving them of a right to communicate or study, including those that were engaged in online studies. I will now embark on the plight of civil society organizations in Uganda. The suspension of work permits for organizations that work on governance, human rights, and elections violates the NGO Act of Uganda, violates the NGO Amendment Act of 2024, because the definition of the NGO Bureau in Section 16 means the board members of the Bureau. These board members do not exist after rationalization. The secretary who signed forms purporting to be holding out as the Bureau is impersonating the Bureau and has no such mandate. And the suspended NGOs were not given a right to be heard, which is a right provided for in the NGO Act. and the indefinite suspension of permits is in effect closure of NGOs without due process. The NGOs have been intimidated into silence because of a mention of activities prejudicial to national security, and most of them are hopeless and they cannot fight back. My third issue is on general human rights violations in Uganda. The militarization of the accreditation process for voter education and election observation leading to elections, which we refused, saying that voter education cannot be the business of the military. And because we were pushing back protecting the laws of Uganda, we were then marked as dangerous. In this election, there was no credible voter education, high militarization of elections, and disruption of opposition campaigns, especially those of the National Unity Platform, disrupted by the military and police, including roadblocks, the issues that we were talking about that led to the arrest.
Ms. Barreet, I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
Our chair, Hilde Woutmans, she had to leave, so I'm stepping in for her. My name is Ingeborg Telek, and I'm the vice chair of this committee. Can I ask you, please, to come to your conclusions, because I assumed this was your third and last item you wanted to address, or not?
Yes, please. I will mention the state of judiciary and rule of law as I go towards the conclusion.
Thank you.
We have the weak judiciary in place with questionable legitimacy because the Bar Association of Uganda has been locked out of the Judicial Service Commission, and the ongoing appointments, including that of the Chief Justice and Principal Judge, have questionable legitimacy because of lack of quorum at the Judicial Service Commission. There is also abuse of the presumption of innocence by the courts of Uganda, and anybody suspected of committing a crime is treated as if they have already been convicted, and this is a violation of Article 28 of the Constitution. As I conclude, I want to re-echo the diplomatic relations between the EU member states and citizens of Uganda. There is remarkable silence from your representatives in Uganda, and we understand the diplomatic relations to be relations between member states while promoting the pride and welfare of citizens. There is silence on violation of human rights in Uganda. There is silence on the re-echoing of EU values that are enshrined under Article 2 of the treaty, and through you, I want to request that the people of Uganda should not be pushed to lose confidence in your representatives in our capitals by neglecting the rule of law and rights of the people. I thank you so much.
Asante sana, Mrs. Biriti, and your message is very well heard on this side. It's very well heard by the Parliament, and thank you so much for your intervention. And I think you really paved the way for our next speaker to also say something about the diplomatic relationships we hold as Europe with Uganda. So I want to give the floor to Mr. Jonas Jonasson, head of the unit for the Horn of Africa and East Africa in the European External Action Service. Mr. Johnson is the European Parliament resolution specifically called on the EU to engage with Ugandan authorities regarding violations, close monitoring relevant trails, and to review cooperation with the Assistance for Uganda to ensure respect for EU principles, as Mrs. Bariti was saying, implementing targeted sanctions and prioritize support for civil society, human rights, and LGBTIQ plus defenders and journalists. Can you please inform us about what the EEAS has been doing so far, both in Brussels and in Kampala, and how do you see the way forward? Mrs. Jonasson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, honourable members of this Parliament and distinguished colleagues also in this discussion, like the previous speakers. it's a very important opportunity indeed to discuss the situation in Uganda and EU-Uganda relations. Indeed, I would like to say a few words about that on our assessment of the elections and indeed, Chair, as you said, on the way ahead. Mm-hmm. First of all, I just wanted to refer to our statement of the 23rd of January, where we commented and acknowledged the results of the elections, but also expressed our regrets, especially with regard to post-election violence and threats against the opposition. The Chair already referred to the context of, indeed, EU-Uganda relations, where obviously there are many shared areas of common interest for cooperation with Uganda and with Ugandan people, which ranges from trade and investments, green transition, connectivity, climate resilience, sustainable forestry, etc. And in all of this, as you know, one of our flagship initiatives, the Global Gateway Strategy, is very prominent here. I will refrain from going into details, but also to say, as the Chair already mentioned, that Uganda's role in the region for peace and security is very important. Somalia was mentioned. Uganda's role as a major refugee hosting nation is very important and contributing to regional stabilization. And of course, Uganda has a global voice, for example, chairing the non-aligned movement. And in all of this, we stress that Uganda, through our governance programs, also strengthens the democratic process and civil society. And we believe that our economic cooperation and in all these areas that I mentioned will also promote the interest of youth, notably. Having said that, the EU continues to support governance reforms, civil society and human rights initiatives, because sustainable development depends on accountable institutions, the rule of law and inclusive participation. And over many years, we have worked with Ugandan institutions and stakeholders to support democratic processes through election observation, governance programs, civic participation initiatives, and sustained political dialogue to contribute to an environment where political competition remains peaceful, inclusive, and trusted by citizens, as we have heard, is a very major issue. On the recent elections, actually our observations, and I knew that there would have been a representative also of the AU-IGAD COMESA findings of the elections. They largely coincide and align, which acknowledge the largely peaceful conduct of voting while highlighting concerns related to the political playing field, arrests of opposition actors, and restrictions affecting access to information. And such observations underline the importance of continuous dialogue aimed at strengthening electoral credibility over time. And as I already said, we said publicly we regretted the post-electoral violence and threats, particularly against opposition leader Robert Kyagulanyi, Bobi Wine, and we called on all parties to exercise restraint on the authorities to ensure the safety of all political actors. Looking ahead, electoral reforms remains an important area of engagement, and we continue to encourage progress on issues such as the independence of the Electoral Commission, transparency in results management, campaign finance, oversight, equitable media access, and effective dispute resolution mechanism, and anchoring all these reforms in Uganda's own constitutional jurisprudence. Through initiatives such as governance programs, the EU has supported civic education, dialogue platforms, rule of law initiatives, and capacity building efforts designed to strengthen institutions and encourage peaceful political participation as a long-term strategy to promote democracy and the rule of law. And for this reason, we remain our engagement with all actors, government institutions, opposition representatives, but also civil society, religious leaders, and security actors, because we want to support this inclusive dialogue. We will therefore also continue to engage as a predictable, principled and long-term partner supporting Uganda's democratic journey through dialogue, cooperation and shared commitment to stability and inclusive government. That is particularly important as we actually celebrate this year the 50th anniversary of our relationship. And in that spirit, we would like to continue the support to the issues we have discussed today. But I want to stress that we are closely and we continue to closely monitoring the situation, as we've heard about today, the political and civic space, as well as the human rights situation in the country. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to colleagues, to members. Would you please, do you have questions? Would you like to speak out or to intervene? Yes, please. Yes, please, Mr. Ujen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thanks for organizing this today's hearing. And I would like first to say on a personal note to Robert, all the best for you and for your family as well. We had the opportunity to discuss with David Lewis a couple of days ago about the situation during the election. And indeed, this looks more like a military operation, as you say, than to a real election. And for me, it's quite obvious that Uganda is can be at the same time this country that is brings stability to the region by engaging with neighbors and by hosting refugees from neighbors. And at the same time being horrible to its own opposition to people that engage in civil society. In a way, this country has kind of a split personality, being good at this on the one hand and mean to the inside, and that this state is a state as a booty for the Museveni family, and the regime can be seen today. Today there was planned to be held a Catholic Mass in the Lubaga Cathedral for political prisoner, Dr. Kisa Pasikye, and other political prisoners that has been cancelled on the last minute by the Archbishop, probably because he got a call that it would be wise not to do this. For me, this shows that this is not a free country. I can only say that for me, there's no transparency in those elections, and already acknowledging the results of that such a fraudulent election is taking part in supporting a regime that is, from my point of view, not duly elected. So I think that we are already too positive on that note as a European Union. So it's said several times that the Ugandan constitution is very clear on the provisions, but apparently nobody cares, at least from those who are in the regime. So my question to our friends in Uganda is, what can we do further to support democracy and rule of law and human rights in Uganda, a part of doing what we do today, which is putting light to this situation. You request for targeted sanctions. My question to BAS is, what is hindering us if we know clearly that there are some people personally involved in abducting people, killing people, to put in place targeted sanction? These are my two questions to our esteemed guests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there other colleagues who want to take the floor or not? Otherwise, Bobi Wine. Sorry for your family name is a little bit difficult for me to pronounce.
Yeah.
If you can give the floor first to you and then to Mrs. B. Rita. Yes.
Sure. May I request that you repeat the question again, please?
So, Robert, first I said all the best for you personally and for your family. But I wanted to know, part of putting light on the situation and organizing meetings like this and calling for targeted sanctions, what else can we do in order to support you on the ground that are working for democracy in your country?
Thank you very much. I'll talk about what you can do from your end and what you can do from our end here in Uganda. From your end, of course, you can apply targeted sanctions. And I hear very many times regime apologists claiming that when you put targeted sanctions on individuals, it affects the nation. No, it does not. It saves the nation. You can slap targeted sanctions, travel sanctions, economic and legal, to the individuals, which individuals we have presented internationally, and others have actually come out themselves, like General Muhoozi, Museveni's son. You have laws like the Global Magnitsky, which has been applied to many human rights violators. We request that the same be applied to the regime back in Uganda. But also association. I mean, it slaps those who believes in democracy and human rights in the face when they see ambassadors or diplomats from the world-known democracies standing shoulder to shoulder with gross human rights violations. For example, imagine just a day or hours after General Muhoozi tweets taking pride in murdering people, in attacking people's families and undressing people and tweeting it, taking pride in killing. And then the next minute, you're going to see an official picture of an ambassador from a renowned democracy standing shoulder to shoulder. That is embracing, that is legitimizing impunity. And we call for a distancing on that. I mean, I've not seen an ambassador or an government official from a democracy standing shoulder to shoulder with Lukashenko or these other, renowned dictators. Also, we have requested that for all the aid that is extended to Uganda, let it be conditional. Let it be conditioned to respect to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. That would be very helpful. If it is not possible to cut out any cooperation, of course, the best thing would be for a democracy to disassociate from anything that contradicts the same. However, if it is not achievable to completely disassociate, then at least let there be a minimum of demanded, reforms that can lead Uganda to a line of democracy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bobi Wine. And now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Sarah Biriti. I don't see her. Are you still there? Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Sarah, can you say something?
Thank you so much.
About what we can do from our side? More.
Yes, I associate myself with the submissions of Honorable Chagrani on what you can do. I just want to re-emphasize 3 issues. One is that you should use more of the Global Magnitsky Act on individuals that are engaged in gross violations of human rights in Uganda. 2 is that you should put stringent measures to your funding agreements regarding the protection of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Uganda that are at their lowest at this time, and we are worried about the next 5 years as citizens. 3 is that you should support more people as compared to government. Empower the people to fight for and protect their democracy. This is what you can do.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Biriti. And now, last, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Johnson. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about the sanctions, but also the conditions for aid.
Thank you very much. Well, it has been many references to the treaties of the European Union, and of course that is what's steering our engagement with all our partners globally. So it also in this case, of course, our development cooperation and our cooperation in general is not unconditional. It is based on our very clear values and expectations. In the case of Uganda, I've already outlined how we, at this stage, we monitor the situation very, very closely. We are engaging in a dialogue with both government, indeed, but also opposition and civil society. All of this, of course, is not happening in the public eye, but there is clearly a very proactive approach that we have, and also, of course, frank discussions. And it's through our development cooperation and the cooperation that we have, of course, we target that very much to governance and support to civil society, as I've outlined. And we have the possibility of focusing additionally on that as we deem necessary, and to accompany a reform process. So the way we today, the approach that we have today is one of engagement, and the proposals of restrictive measures have not been on the table in these discussions and in our and also in our discussions with our member states.
Thank you. And I would like to thank all our speakers, or all our guests for today, for their interventions. And I also would like to emphasize and to stress that we as European Parliament are committed to support a peaceful and prosperous society in Uganda, and to do the work with all the relevant stakeholders to achieve this. So we will continue closely monitoring the situation in Uganda. And we do call on the Ugandan authorities to guarantee the possibility of a safe return, physical integrity and freedom of movement for Mr. Robert Kyagulanyi, Bobi Wine, as well as to ensure due process and an independent investigation into the arbitrary arrest and detention of Dr. Sarah Biriti. With this, dear colleagues, this brings us almost to the end of this meeting. If there are no more questions for the members, then I would like to close today's meeting. The next date of the next delegation meeting will be communicated in time. So hereby I close the meeting, so I'm very sorry. Good to see you.
It's overlapping meetings. I was coming completely from Libe meeting.
I'm sorry, so yeah, next time. Okay, thank you so much.